This might be an interesting take, but Theater of Pain is back and I'm not hating it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not the biggest fan of 5 boss dungeons, but I think Blizzard has definitely made some of the visuals in this dungeon great, and some of the reworked mechanics are pretty solid. What I always loved about this dungeon were the unique strategies and approaches to different wings, paired with what I would consider generally good boss design. Let's dive into the Colosseum and take a look at what has changed. Nothing at the start has really changed. You're still facing a few mobs before being able to tackle the first boss. Now, some players will remember that it was a strategy to actually skip the first 3 mobs and pull the cowman into the boss with Lust and CDs. I've seen varying success rates on this on PTR so far, but the first boss was slightly reworked, which can add a layer of complexity to this dungeon. If you happen to hold W though, you'll usually just pull these 2 packs together. The tank will then take a lot of damage, so you need to be careful. The first boss has had a few changes, but nothing too noticeable. There is now a large frontal that you'll need to make sure you're avoiding. And then there's also new visual indicators to the poison pools that spawn, which is nice, but they are fast. The general strategy here is to target Sathel and focus him down. He adds a lot of group damage and rot, which can be nasty when overlapped with Desia's smash. Outside of that, nothing else has really changed. My only current issue in this boss room is that the visual indicators tend to clip into the floor underneath the bosses. Blizzard definitely needs to fix this before the patch goes live. Once you're heading into the Theater of Pain, we'll head into the South Wing first, where you'll find yourselves inside the Halls of Might. Nothing in here has changed outside of visuals either, so if you did play in Shadowlands, you're going to remember this wing pretty well. First, there are a couple of archers that will apply nasty bleeds and spam shoot at your party members. After that, you're going to see 2 large men brawling it out. Now, back in the day, these mini-bosses were the bane of most groups' existence. There was a way to basically choose which one you can take on, but it was tricky to get correct. I believe the strategy was to trigger the RP during the preferred mini-boss's attack swing, but that was always, in my opinion, just a theory. Some of these mini-bosses are easier than others, and there are mechanics that can be avoided using line of sight, and others, not so much. You'll need to take out at least 2 of these mini-bosses as well, but it is possible to skip and make up % later. The only large pack in this wing is the Patrol, which has a Captain, which unfortunately reduces AoE damage taken by the group. Some abilities that you think are AoE technically aren't, so this doesn't actually cause too many issues. For example, Chain Lightning seems to be doing normal damage, but something like Earthquake will deal reduced damage, since that ability is actually coded as AoE. Anyways, this last mini-boss you can skip with something like Lockgate or Mind Soothe. After this, you will be on Zav. This boss works exactly the same, spawning banners that you're going to need to focus down. These banners apply a stacking slow to anyone in the arena, so it makes it difficult to dodge his series of attacks. All the damage on this fight though is going to be basically a one-shot, so if you survive the burst of damage and keep the banners under control, it's a fairly simple yet enjoyable fight, especially if you're playing with friends who want to duel each other. Next, we'll enter the Barrow of Carnage. This wing has some important kicks, but it also includes very large pulls, which can be very fun for DPS and tanks alike. There isn't really anything notable in here, except you can skip around this patrolling mob by just hugging the wall. Similar to the first boss of this dungeon, it was a common strategy to pull these 2 guys into Gore Chop. Tanks will need to be careful with this pull, but you can just cleave them down with the boss and probably Lust. Gore Chop though, during Shadowlands was probably one of my favorite fights, and I still think that remains true. There's just something about dodging these chains. Once Gore Chop does fall, you can click on the chain to head back up into the final wing of the dungeon. The Altars of Agony. This wing has smaller pulls, and it definitely contains the majority of the casters in this dungeon, but nothing is unmanageable. I know some players don't like the RP flying through the portals, but I do like the routing options that this implicates. Some of the caster mobs are also extremely easy to deal with. As long as you have a purge in your group, you can remove their bone shields, making these mobs extremely brittle, and they'll fall over almost immediately. The only important cast I would really say is important to be aware of is the Necrotic Bolt Volleys. As long as you kick these, you'll be fine. Now, Kul'Tharok. This was a boss that Blizzard has totally shifted the design for. I will be doing full boss guides when the patch is closer, but I do at least want to explain what's going on here. First, do what you can to interrupt the necrotic bolts that he casts, but honestly, they're going to be the least of your worries. Mr. Tharok will then spawn death orbs, which will rotate around the room. Dodging these can be annoying as a tank or melee, but honestly, as a tank, I was just eating them. As long as you move against the way that they're moving, you'll take minimal damage. There's also a frontal mechanic that's slightly bugged. If you move outside of melee range, it will actually snap to a random party member, which makes this fight a little more annoying. And that's actually one of the reasons I was just eating the orbs. It meant that the frontal was always going to go on me. Circles will also spawn around 3 players, dealing damage, so you're going to want to spread out with these. And lastly, arrows will appear over all 5 party members' heads, and when this debuff falls off, this will spawn adds, which will attempt to reach the boss, I believe doing a burst of damage, drop them away, and ideally trying to keep them grouped up. They can be CC'd, which is good, so Death Grip, Ring of Peace, Ursul's Vortex, but all other forms of CC can help keep the adds slowed, stunned, or in place. DPS basically just need to kill these adds as quickly as possible. Outside of the bugginess of the frontal and the orbs feeling a little too quick for melee, this new fight design is very cool. Good job, Blizzard. Kul'Tharok was always an egregious fight for most groups, so I think that this shift should make it easier and less of a wall for pugs. Once Kul'Tharok falls, you can head back to the theater surface to take on Mordretha. This fight is identical to the Shadowlands predecessor. There is just a bug where the circles tend to be clipping underneath like the floor. Again, Blizzard just needs to fix this by the time the patch launches. I can't imagine it won't be fixed, but yeah, outside of that, it's a 2-phase fight that gets progressively harder. Phase 2 is extremely lethal, especially because of these charging cows, but once she dies, that's the dungeon. Honestly, I'm impressed with Theater of Pain, especially after the insane tuning we saw in dungeons from the last testing cycle. We were able to time multiple 12s in this dungeon so far, and the new visuals make some of the mechanics just easier to dodge and more enjoyable to play. The major pain points of the dungeon, in my opinion, still include the mini-bosses in the Halls of Might. It's clear that some of them are just way better than others, and if you have bad RNG or you can't proc the one that you want to do, it could easily lead to just like a group wipe, which is frustrating. Being able to completely negate some of the mechanics by using line of sight while having to deal with others is just seems imbalanced to me. I think they should make them static or make the trigger easier to understand. But outside of that, I don't really have too many complaints. I guess like Affront of Challengers also can be very painful at the start with high burst damage, plus the clipping swirls add a layer of difficulty, but I do like the change in direction. If Blizzard can fix these things by the next testing cycle, I'll be extremely pleased. The one other thing that I do want to point out is if you notice, I was playing a lot of Prot Warrior. There are some insanely overpowered spell reflex in this dungeon, which can be tremendous in speeding up boss fights. Both Kul'Tharok's frontal, as well as Mordretha's Reaping Scythe Tank Buster can be reflected for some pretty serious damage. For Kul'Tharok though, I couldn't seem to get every reflect, and I'm not sure if that was a bug or not. The Tank Buster was happening every 25-ish seconds, so in theory it should hit. Despite casting Spell Reflect like 4 or 5 times, it only reflected 2 of the frontals. Mordretha though, this ability carries. You don't even have to play the game. You could just land most of your Spell Reflex on this boss and you'll be fine. Anyways, the dungeon's good. I'm a fan, even though it's not a popular opinion. I will be doing boss guides and dungeon walkthroughs later down the road as we approach the patch. So if you're interested in those, feel free to subscribe. It's free and you can always change your mind later. And then lastly, a massive shout out to my Patreons. Their support allows me to make videos like this. I hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.